Michael Killen. Our guest is Charles L. Brown, the former chairman of AT&T Corporation. Mr. Brown, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Michael, thank you.
On January the 8th, 1982, the world was shocked. I think at 11:45 in the morning, you and William Baxter, the Assistant Attorney General, stood up in the Washington Press Club and made a historic announcement. And in that announcement, as Charles Class said, you agreed to the divestiture of AT&T. I'd like to know, there are many chairmen that have come before you, and AT&T has a great history of keeping that great corporation together. Why did you make that decision to break up the company?
I think along with that history that you speak of, keeping the company together, there was also a history of adapting the company to what its circumstances looked like at the time. All the way back through the originators of the company, they had to make changes in their plans in order to adapt to what the public expected of the company and what the political environment was at the time. And so this, I felt, was one of those times when you had to shift in order for the company itself, the Bell system itself, to survive and operate well.
So that must be something you relied on to give you the confidence, fortitude, to make the decision that those that came before you had to make changes to meet the needs. And the world is changing much more, I guess, than ever before. So you had a need to make a more significant change than maybe any of them had made.
Yes, I think so. Everybody's problems seem large to them, I'm sure, but clearly this was a fundamental change that could not be reversed. And it required a lot of thought, a lot of agonizing in order to come to that point. When
did you finally make up your mind that you had to settle the U.S. versus AT&T antitrust case?
Well, in 1981, we were struggling with Congress trying to deal with bills that we could live with. We were not very successful at it. Every bill that came out was worse than the last one as far as we were concerned. And the problem of getting Congress to express itself and express policy remained undone and in fact harmful. Secondly, the antitrust suit was moving along at an accelerated pace under a judge who was going to complete it before very long. And thirdly, we had the FCC making a policy on its own without direction from Congress. And I believe at the time I called it a three-ring circus, and it's still, I still feel that's what it looked like.
Congress, the Department of Justice,
and the FCC.
And the FCC. How much time do you believe you had before Judge Harold Green ruled on the AT&T case?
Oh, I imagine it would have been in the order of 6-7 months.
6-7
perhaps
months.
Less.
And do you have an estimate of what was going to happen?
No, and that was mainly the problem. There were some solutions that I would prefer, and some I would abhor. But the problem was I didn't know what was going to happen. And that's the reason I thought it was wise to act.
You don't think Judge Green was moving more toward ruling against AT&T?
I saw no indication that he would vindicate us completely.
All right. Now, why, though, at the end of 1981, would you be really motivated to act? It seems to me Reagan had come to office the previous November, and I believe he appointed William Baxter as the Attorney General. Any special reason for acting then as opposed to waiting another 6 months?
Yes. Well, in that kind of a situation, one looks to see what solutions there are which can be seized upon and can be will stick. In other words, in dealing with the federal government, it's very difficult to tell who's in charge. Or a three-tier or three-branch system ensures that. And so dealing with Congress was exceptionally difficult, and there wasn't any way I had seen up to date to be able to settle on something we could agree with and that they would agree to. The FCC was doing its best to try to assimilate the changes going on and set the policy. Some of the things they were doing we agreed with, and others that we did not. And in the meantime, the antitrust suit was hanging over our head. One of the solutions, you know, if you play what-if games back over the years, as we did, one of the solutions was to separate the local business from the long-distance business, and that would solve the Justice Department's alleged problems with the Bell system. When Baxter made some changes in the stated demands of the Justice Department when he came in, and it appeared that Baxter was one person in the federal government with whom we could make an agreement which would stick, and that was a reasonable opportunity to take action.
Yeah. Why did you think Baxter was the person you could make an agreement that would stick? Why him?
Well, first of all, he unequivocally stated that he was going to litigate this case, as he expressed it, to the eyeballs, yeah. Which meant that he was going to follow through on this case, that he believed the Bell system should be broken up. And he had his own reasons for this theory and this desire. He, in effect, didn't report to anybody. First of all, the Attorney General had recused himself from the case. He had some connection with Pacific Telephone before he was appointed Attorney General, and so he said he wasn't going to have anything, make any decisions with respect to the case. Secondly, the number 2 man in charge of the Justice Department said the same thing. He had some connection with the Bell system previously, and he too said he wasn't going to make any decisions. That left Baxter, who was willing to make decisions, and as I said, had nobody to report to, and could make them stick.
So there was no chain of command above Baxter, except all the way up, I guess, to the President. And the President probably wouldn't get involved in something like this, or would he?
The President clearly, the President and I think all the cabinet officers over the period of time clearly stated that they did not think it was appropriate to break up the Bell system. The President stated it in various ways. And so that was one of the frustrating points here. As I've said before, all the elected officials, including congressmen and senators, were not in favor of this. And yet, inexorably, it was happening.
Now, the lawsuit against AT&T was running for maybe 60 years at this point.
From 1974, yes.
Yeah, and it's now late 1981. I'd like to know, who called who? Did you decide to have someone call the Department of Justice and say, let's have discussions for how we can settle this? Or did they take the initiative and call you?
Well, we were in discussions all along. Howard Treenan's, my lawyer, was in discussion with Baxter and with other Department of Justice lawyers on negotiating some sort of a settlement which would involve a decree which could be monitored so that make sure that we were not violating anything that was held dear by the Justice Department lawyers. And so there's continuous conversations going on at that time. And finally, we decided that we'd ask them what does it take to settle this case, and Treenan's asked that question.
So you, via Treenan, took the initiative. That's what.
I think it's fair to say that, although it was clear also that Baxter had laid the groundwork for it by his his stated objectives.
And the Department of Justice was obviously receptive to trying to settle this before the court ruled.
Baxter was, and I'm not sure the degree to which he was talking with his subordinates. The people handling the case from the Justice Department standpoint were in on this settlement very late.
Sure, but Baxter, you know, he was a new entity just coming in. He wasn't really part of the fight, not the long-term fight against AT&T. Yes, I guess he would be more objective, open to settlement.
Baxter's his own man and understands the problem quickly. Although I didn't agree with what his premises were, I certainly felt that he had the position and the gumption to stick with the decision.
To settle this case, a document had to be created, a document that defines AT&T's new role and the role of, in this case, the 7 new regional holding companies that would be created. I believe it's called a modified final judgment. You participated in the creation of that document?
No. Trenans and I decided that what was needed was to find out what the Justice Department would settle for. So Trenans asked Baxter for a 2-pager. In other words, not a book on the subject, just what is it you would settle for. And Baxter came up with that. And that made the basic, that was the basic document that we operated from. And very little changes were made in that.
So Baxter submitted a 2-page document. Trenan, consulting with you, embellished it a bit.
Very little.
Very little. So then, who put in the clause into the modified final judgment that allowed AT&T to be free of the 1954 consent agreement, allowing AT&T to enter non-telephone business?
Well, of course, we insisted on it. That was not something we would agree to at all if we were confronted with being restricted from the 1976 or 1956 decree and having another one on top of it. So we said, you know, don't saddle us with both of them. And this didn't bother Baxter at all, I believe.
So you would not have agreed to divestiture if Baxter, the Department of Justice, would not allow you to enter other businesses?
Yes, and Baxter is competition-oriented, and he didn't see any problem with that, as far as I know.
Yeah. Baxter apparently put clauses into the modified final judgment prohibiting the new regional holding companies, the 7, of becoming manufacturers. Was that put in by the Department of Justice or by Trenan and
No,
you?
this was a basic. This fitted in with basic theory to which Baxter subscribed. That is, there should not be a connection between the manufacturer and the operator of a monopoly business, which the local telephone companies were. There should not be a connection between the manufacturer and the user of equipment. Secondly, there should not be a connection between the long-distance business and the monopoly-oriented local business, which was necessary to complete calls. And so those 2 things were the keys to Baxter's theory and were put in there, of course, by him.
All right. Now, it seems to me this modified final judgment, which defined the breakup of AT&T, the creation of the new AT&T, the creation of the new RBox, really split the network in half. And I remember reading that your predecessor, DeBucks, said that it's impossible to split the network up and have efficient operation.
Well, I think it's fair to say that if you have 8 companies with different goals and different philosophies, it is more difficult to get a system working in a coordinated fashion than if you have one company setting one policy. I think that's already obvious and theoretically obvious too.
All right. So you feel that the system's working quite well today then, despite the fact that you really have 8 companies going in different directions to some extent.
Yes, I think these companies all have generally the same objective, in the sense that there's no advantage to any company to have unsatisfactory service to the customers, and that they are each doing what they can to provide good service to customers within the framework of what they have. It's different, but I think the general objectives are the same, because there's no advantage to any company in making its customers unhappy.
Recently, I attended a speech by Bob Allen, the new chairman of AT&T, and he said, since divestiture, the cost of long-distance telephone service has come down 40%.
Right.
So, from the consumer's point of view, with respect to long-distance service, it's been a good thing. Would you agree?
Yes, and we've said all along, if you make a lot of long-distance calls, you'll love it. If you don't, you won't, because the parallel to that is that the local rates had to come up, had to go up, and this has happened.
Yeah. Now, Bob Allen also touched on local rates, and he said they didn't go down, they're flat or a little up, which he considers to be a good development, considering that long distance was subsidizing local service prior to divestiture.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I believe that's I believe the long distance rates have gone up higher than they would have otherwise if we had continued the subsidy. But it is true, I think, that it is now clear where the costs are and where the prices, and that the prices are associated with the costs, where it was not clear before.
Yeah. Now, I noticed on January the 8th, 1982, you stood up at the National Press Club building, and one of the points you made was that AT&T is now free to enter other businesses. I think you also used the word, the computer business. Do you remember identifying the computer business as?
Well, it was one obvious place where we had been prohibited from entering before. The technology of computers and the technology of communications are precisely the same. And it was very obvious that one of the major difficulties was being encountered by the FCC in trying to draw a line between what's a computer and what's communications. And they kept on trying to draw and refine this line, knowing all along that it was a very difficult, if not impossible, job to do clearly. And so to get rid of that particular restriction and concern was a very big point. Computers is one obvious place.
Yes, and I noticed later in the day, around 4:30, 5 o'clock, the Department of Justice also made a second historic announcement. They announced the settlement of the 13-year U.S. versus IBM case, which basically freed IBM of a great amount of litigation. When you were settling the AT&T case, and I think you must think about IBM as a potential competitor, did you think at all about what was happening with the government and IBM at that time?
No, they'd been in an antitrust case with IBM for some 13 years, and that was a kind of a recurring soap opera, and it really did not affect our thinking at all. We had our own problems, and what was going to happen over there was not something that was going to affect what we did.
I was just wondering, you're the chairman of AT&T, you had to make a difficult decision with respect to settling or continuing the fight. The chairman of IBM, Frank Carey, also had to make decisions to continue to fight. Their case was probably also shortly going to be ruled upon by a judge. Carey took the approach he was not going to settle. He was going to fight, spend every nickel of IBM, from what I could determine, to drive this to the Supreme Court, whatever he had to take. But you took the approach that you'd rather settle. Looking back today, how do you feel about that? Was that a good decision for you, for AT&T, for the nation?
I think it was, certainly from the standpoint of AT&T and the Bell system. Even if we had completely won the suit in the Justice Department, if we had come out completely whole and been in our favor, the next thing would have happened would be it would be escalated to the next court and the next court, and so we're facing that particular suit for how many years? 7, 8 years probably. In the meantime, all these other pressures from Congress, from the competitors, from the FCC would be continuing, and we would be handicapped without knowing where we were going to end up. We were unable to plan, and it was winning was almost as bad as losing in that sense, that we were hanging on this cusp and would be for a number of years unless we cut that knot. So Frank Gehry had other problems, and I don't believe that he had the same sort of conflicting pressures and would have been in the same fix had the suit just been dropped.
You know, I think you were in a more complex situation
I think
he
so.
was.
I think so. But
I think it was a Friday that you finally made your announcement that you were going to settle the case. What did you do that night? What did you do that weekend? When did you start on the transformation of AT&T?
of course, the two-pager consent decree, modified final judgment, was merely an outline, and it said several things. You get out of the local telephone business, and the operating telephone companies stay out of the manufacturing business and the long-distance business. And then there was a third caveat that had to do with information services. The real problem was, how do you do this? And from that Friday on, we spent a great deal of time and a tremendous amount of effort, and I must say I admire the people who really got that accomplished, to split open what had been essentially a coordinated, close-knit, vertically organized operation. It was a remarkable job, and it was done in 2 years, and it was done with certain compromises, but mostly with agreements on the part of both the operating companies and the AT&T, and the final product was a major piece of work, of which I'm proud.
So you had to find a way to divest 2/3 of over $1 billion in assets, I believe. Something like that.
$58 billion in assets.
58. And I think you had about 1 million employees
Right.
at that time. You had to decide who was going where, and
Yes. And you know, to have a building with long-distance equipment on one floor, local equipment on the next floor, a cable carrying both services going between these equipments. One had to separate out the cable from the one business and the other. Had to decide whose building it was going to be. Had to decide who moved out, and cable in the ground, motor vehicles, operating switchboards, switching machines. The whole schmear had to be divided equitably.
probably the greatest transformation in business history, I believe.
I would not be surprised. I don't know of anything that approached it.
Our guest is Charles L. Brown, the former chairman of AT&T.